following exceptionally high tides a week ago in Port Orange, there's no such thing as climate change. Our great Generalissimo and national high leader has reiterated the grave danger posed by electric vehicles, one of which caught fire and required over 35,000 gallons of our precious pure American water to bring the fire under control. Our firefighters haven't been given the right tools. Government-approved scientists have attributed the high tides to perfectly normal winds. Trust us, don't think. Our loving mighty leader, thinking only of the children, reminds us that thinking unapproved thoughts is punishable with imprisonment, and states that he will focus his attention on destroying the menace that is electric vehicles. We've made several videos debunking some common misconceptions about EVs, including our FUDbusters. But it seems that many people are still hearing and sadly repeating the same old fossil fuel talking points about EVs, and among those are very loud, repetitive concerns about how we will be able to fight all these seemingly inevitable fires that driving EVs will bring. The only problem with those concerns are that, well, EVs catch fire about 60 times less frequently than gasoline vehicles, and if you have the right equipment to fight EV fires, it's possible to extinguish those rare EV fires quickly and safely. So why do we keep seeing breathless headlines and news stories about EVs needing thousands of gallons of water to put them out after a fire? Anyone need to phone a friend? Well, let's start with the first thing. EV fires are rare. Things that are rare tend to get attention when they do happen. The EV loves themselves some EV fire action. But if you've taken even a moderate length road trip, you'll often see at least one and often several dead gas cars on the shoulder. If you're lucky or unlucky, you'll see them on fire or smouldering because, surprisingly, squirting highly flammable fluid around at high pressure near extremely hot things does, at least now and then, result in that gasoline landing somewhere it shouldn't, and then when that happens, there's a moderate chance of a fire. Those stories rarely make even local news unless they happen to take out, say, an entire parking lot full of cars or involve a dramatic fire rescue. To be fair to gasoline cars, the average age of the gasoline fleet is much higher than the average age of the EV fleet, the majority of which are only a few years old. How things will look in 20 years from now may be different, and we may see that EV fires end up being as common as gas fires. But thanks to fewer moving parts and a lack of hot, burny things, I doubt it. Now, fortunately, if you get there quickly, gas car fires are relatively easy to put out. Cooling the source and smothering the flames are enough, and if the fire does extend out of the engine bay, the stuff that would burn, the gasoline, has entirely burned up by the time the fire's out. So once the car's burned, there's nothing to reignite. EV fires are a bit of a different beast. First up, it's not exactly a fire in the traditional sense. It's a heat-releasing or exothermic chemical reaction, so what you're trying to stop isn't a fuel catching on fire because it's hot. You're trying to stop a chemical reaction from happening, which is a somewhat different proposition. And what's happened is that damage to the individual cells in the pack can lead to thermal runaway, and the chemical reaction causing it can occur even hours or days after the original incident that damaged the pack. And even once a fire has been extinguished, the battery can still contain, in undamaged cells, what's called stranded energy, because the pack's been damaged and potentially contains short circuits that can be the cause of reignition later. You'll note that I'm talking about collisions here. That's because fires are vanishingly rare in EVs that haven't been in an accident or don't have an obvious manufacturing defect. That's thanks to an invention that seems to disappear in the next 100-ish years.
Visual.
Yeah, fuses. I'm not sure why they didn't install fuses or AFCIs or any kind of current limiting equipment to the Enterprise, but it seems an oversight. That said, it's a good moment to remember that fires don't just break out in the engine bay, although that's by far the most common location. They can also break out in the cabin, and those kinds of fires are pretty much the same between gasoline and electric vehicles, unless the fire is left unchecked, in which case it could, in an EV, spread to the high voltage battery, and then we're back to that problem. Thankfully, EVs have a lot of software and hardware that's dedicated to keeping things happy and healthy, and should things go awry, they're quick to say, no, I'm not turning on and you're not driving me anywhere. Which is why EVs tend not to spontaneously go poof. Which brings us to our first thing. What are EV manufacturers doing to make it easier to fight EV fires? Well, along with the standard information which is available for any vehicle which advises the fire crew on how to make it safe, that usually includes things like where safe jacking points are, how to disconnect both the 12 volt and the high voltage systems in the vehicle, and where to cut the car to gain emergency access without, say, triggering airbags or other safety systems. In addition to that, some automakers like Renault are also choosing to add access points to the battery casing, which allows firefighters to pump water directly into the battery. These are combined with a QR code which is visible on multiple windows, in this case developed in conjunction with the French Fire Service, which allows more rapid identification of the vehicle and identification of where those access points are. Alongside those innovations, Renault have worked with the fire service to ensure that high voltage cables are not routed through areas where it's common for firefighters to need to cut to gain access to a vehicle. Renault state that these innovations mean that a fire in a Renault EV can be extinguished in minutes rather than hours. Okay, so let's think this through. Despite our best efforts, there's been an accident.
Hey, why can't we say accident again?
Because accident implies there's nobody to blame.
Sorry, there's been an incident, and our EV has caught fire, somewhere a bit remote, so it's taken a while for the fire crew to get there. To aid access, increasingly firefighters are being advised to lift or tilt vehicles using jacks to make it easier to get water into or onto the battery. Often when we've seen videos of firefighters pouring endless gallons of water onto smouldering EVs, the car's been sat on the road, with the firefighters essentially treating it like a gas car, which we know won't work because the water isn't actually getting to the source of the fire, and explains a lot of the "we used 30,000 gallons of water to put out one fire," which we've seen reported here and there. But, like we said, this fire's been burning a while. Or has it? Because there are actually some products appearing now that add fireproofing materials within the battery casing to reduce the risk of a fire still further. These materials, in addition to being highly fire resistant, also expand when sufficiently heated, filling voids or puncture holes and smothering a nascent fire. Okay, so let's pretend it's an older EV which doesn't have any of that. So it's been out in the sticks. That means it's out somewhere remote, by the way. So it's been out in the sticks, burning for a while, and so the fire is now so hot that the fire crew can't get near the car to tilt it or access that nice port for pumping water directly into the battery. So what else could we do? Well, there are some more specific firefighting tools and equipment that we're likely to see becoming far more common. First up, there's things like the battery extinguishing system technology, which is slid under a vehicle and then punctures the battery pack, allowing water to be delivered directly to the battery pack itself. So even if the vehicle is very much on fire and you can't get your team to the access point on the pack that the manufacturer built in, you can skip that step and go straight to the core. Only, not like that. Anyhow, systems like that allow firefighters to direct the water where it's needed.
Use the force, Luke.
Which brings me to an important point. While we often think of fire trucks being full of water, and they are, typically when fighting fires, a wetting agent, that's something that reduces the surface tension of the water. You know surface tension. That's the thing that makes water bead up on a surface. Either something to reduce surface tension or a foaming agent is added to the water to change its properties such that it's better for fighting the specific type of fire that they're, fighting. By adding substances as simple as what is essentially soap through to more complex chemicals, you can make each gallon of water be much more effective. Though it should be noted that most of these chemicals are substances that you don't really want getting into waterways. But we're already using them to fight fires, including the 60 times more common gas car fires. So yeah, take from that what you will. When it comes to fighting EV fires specifically, there are also modern additives which can be used to encapsulate the vehicle or the battery, and which vastly increase the ability of the water to absorb heat. One example of this is F500 Encapsulator Agent. Now, I asked the makers of this if a video was available of firefighters using it on an EV, because fighting EV fires is one of the specific things it's targeted at. But they didn't manage to get me a video back in time for this, so you'll just have to make do with them putting out a fire in a much more common thing, a gas car, which it also works on. These kinds of substances can dramatically reduce the quantity of water and the amount of time needed to put out an EV fire. That reduces the risk to your fire crew, and in this case, keep that fire put out. Oh, and in this case, it's also non-hazardous and apparently biodegradable, which is nice. Of course, there's another way that you could not use quite so much water, and that's to control the fire and then direct a much smaller quantity of water to help control smoke and add some more cooling. And that's a technique that multiple companies have taken with fire blankets. These can be pulled over a burning vehicle, which is then cooled using a much smaller quantity of water, usually a mister or aerosoling device. And then once things are a little more under control, you can take your badly damaged EV and dunk it in a tank. There are several options available for this as well, and all of the ones I can find basically work on the same principle. You either drag, which is preferable, or lift the disabled vehicle into the tank, either while it's still on fire or once the fire's out. That tank is then filled with 3 to 6 feet depth. That's about 1 to 2 meters of water, and the car's left there until you're ready to deal with the battery pack. After a day or two of sitting, the pack is likely safe to at least dismantle and recycle or destroy. And then there's one other way you could use less water. You could use a different substance altogether. Porover's Extova Extinguisher is an example of that. It's a non-toxic, expanded glass aggregate made from post-consumer recycled glass. Used in conjunction with a tank, ideally it acts to extinguish and keep extinguished battery fires. Neat. And that is your final firefighting option, at least for this video. So really there's not much of an excuse for tipping 30,000 gallons of water onto an EV, other than thanks to massive efficiency savings, including an 80% reduction in spending by our fire service. We didn't invest in training and equipment for our local fire service, and now they've resorted to throwing rocks at fires. I'm sure there are ways that I missed, so let us know in the comments below if there's something else that your team has used or that you've seen for putting out EV fires. But because EVs are now getting more common to the point of being most new car sales in some countries, and even the US is starting to get on the EV train. Yeah. Anyway, we'll all be seeing many more of these EVs and many more of the techniques for fighting fires in the future. And on that note, we're done with today's video. If you liked it, you know what to do, and feel free to tip us with a super thanks. The comments are open for your thoughts, as is our Discord chat room. Links are down there. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links below to regularly support us with a YouTube membership or Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and Swag store. And check us out on Mastodon. We have our very own server. Scrolling on my right is the list of amazing charged up supporters. Look at them there. And shout outs go to our self-driving tier supporters: Mike Weeder, Patrick Boyarski, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Michael Goad, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Pedro Muro Pinheiro, Brophy Wolf, Chris and Michael Johnson, Tezza in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C., Stephen O'Donoghue, Kyle Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Regine Fellows, Denny Hyde, Chris Ascenter, and Jim Burness. Finally, out of this world thanks to our Starman supporters: Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, JP Fagerback, Joe Bresney, John Lyons, Rory Litwin, Kevin Burrowbridge, Dave Kitchen, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Paul Conway, Reggie Watts, Will Graylan, and of course Ian. We'll be back soon with more videos, but until then, keep evolving!